Hello and welcome to the Well-Seasoned Librarian podcast. I'm the Well-Seasoned Librarian, Dean Jones. Today's podcast is Season 1, Episode 9. We're talking with Heather Arndt Anderson. Heather is a Portland, Oregon-based food writer, culinary historian, and botanist, as well as a regular panelist on the podcast The Four Top. She is the author of Breakfast to History and also Portland, a Food Biography, as well as numerous other books as well. I enjoyed this conversation very much, and I hope you will too. And onward to the conversation.
All right. Welcome to the Well-Seasoned Librarian. Today in conversation with Heather Arndt Anderson and I, we're discussing her numerous books on food and her food writing. Hello, Heather. How's it going?
It's going pretty hot here in Portland today. It's we're in the end of the heat dome, or as I've been calling it, the hunkering. Heat dome 2021, the hunkering. Yeah, we're having record-breaking heat wave right now that will mercifully end this evening when we get some inland breeze from the coast finally.
Thank God. I have a lot of friends that live up there, and they're all been talking about how horrible it's been.
Yeah, most of us don't have air conditioning because, a lot of people will just wait out the, couple days of the year that it gets over 100. But when it's sustained for a few days and it's, people just aren't prepared. It's too hot.
Does it affect gardening at all? Because I know that in my garden, I've had some scorched peppers and stuff like that. Does that affect your garden?
Yeah. So I've been doing a really long, 2-hour deep soaks in the morning. My front garden though, I'm already seeing a lot of heat stress. All my containers are pretty heat stressed. I did also already see some of my tomatoes showing blossom end rot from just getting so hot, the fluctuating temperatures and the uneven watering. So yeah, I expect some casualties. I'm hoping that things can bounce back because I do have pretty strong plants and I keep them pretty watered. So fingers crossed.
Well, I've loved your books. I've read basically, I think, everything I can on you that you have out currently. And I really love your writing. I wanted to ask you about your writing style because I like to read a lot of different things. And one thing I really enjoy is when a writer can deal with a topic that might be dry to some people and add some character and some charm to it. One author I like to read is Mary Roach. She writes a lot about different topics, but she adds a lot of humor and she has her own voice. And you have a definite narrative voice, I've noticed, that's very strong. I think that your books would be perfect in many ways for somebody to read as an audiobook because they have a really nice flow and they have a good kind of personality to them, which not everybody has. I've read many books that are on various topics, even food, for instance, where if somebody had to read it, it'd be difficult. You'd need to be a really good thespian to add, but your books aren't like that. So your book on berries, for instance, a global history on berries, berries, a global history, sorry. And your book, Chili is a global history. They have a combination of information, science, and then there's some mythology and stuff in there and cultural history. Was that an intention? Was that just the way you like to write, or did you think this is how I'm going to do it when you wrote them?
Well, I think that it's important when we are discussing single topics, and in this case, it's a part of a series, the Edible series by Reaction Books, and so each book is only one ingredient or one topic. I think that when you're dealing with a single subject, it's important to provide some cultural context. Otherwise, it's just a botany book. And actually, when I pitched the Chili's book, they said that they would have accepted it either for the Edible series or for their botany series, just because my background being in botany meant that I could approach the topic from different angles. And so part of it is that, I wanted to flex a little bit that, I have some knowledge in life sciences, but I think that when you're dealing with a subject such as chilies or berries, and both in cases, it's hard to really it's hard to define what these foods can mean to people around the world when we're talking like a global history without bringing in the culture of that is behind the diet and the food itself. And I think that food is the most interesting way to study culture. For me, I much prefer studying culture through its food than through its wars or,
Yeah,
its
yeah,
tragedy.
I totally agree.
But then, yeah, I mean, as far as like my writing style goes, I began writing as a blogger, and it was mostly just, me kind of goofing around about what I'd been cooking or eating, and using a conversational style was just what came naturally to me and made it easier to get my thoughts down on paper without being paralyzed by the fear that I wasn't a good writer or whatever. It's like I enjoy talking about these things, and so I can just type the words instead of saying them out loud, and hopefully it makes my voice clear. And that's one of the things that I have heard about my writing, is that I have a clear voice, and I think it's just because it sounds like somebody talking. It's basically what it is, somebody talking.
Yeah, I know that not all writers can pull it off well, and you do. You pull it off very well, and it's very engaging and nice. I read a book on cannibalism and biology in the animal kingdom last year, and that's not something that normally lend itself to humor, but the author tried to put some humor in, and we're like, dude, no.
Tough crowd.
Yeah.
Everyone's a critic, Dean.
Yeah.
Yeah, not everyone can stick the humor. And actually, in when I was reading a review of my book, Portland, a Food Biography, the review that appeared in Oregon Historical Quarterly, which had been written by an academic, he did kind of critique some of my jokes. So I know that I didn't land them all either, but and these are, can be very dry topics. I want them to be entertaining to read, and I want the information to be engaging, because this is stuff that I'm super interested in. And if I can't convey my enthusiasm about the subject, then I have no business writing about it.
I like that. Your book on breakfast was a wonderful surprise. And not only was it informative and it talked about breakfast, but I found in many parts of it, the historical parts were very interesting to me that I had not seen in a lot of other books. I mean, oftentimes it's just a regurgitation of information, but you added a really interesting social kind of context to it. And so I wanted to ask you about your research for the book, and what did you learn? What was surprising to you when you did the research for the book?
Well, I was relieved to learn that so much information is really available on Google Books, because so many libraries around the world have digitized their collections, and particularly older materials that I normally would have had to make an interlibrary loan to get access to, and it would have been really time consuming and required a lot of heavy lifting. So having access to so much information on the internet has been such a boon. And at the time I wrote that book, my son was just 2 years old. And so I was working during his nap times. That was when I wrote that book. And so having the luxury of being able to stay home to do so much of my research it really made the project doable. I wouldn't have been able to complete the book at that time if it hadn't been for that easy access to information. And then being part of such a good library system here in Portland, the Multnomah County library system is outstanding. So I've got free access to JSTOR for research without having to have an academic account. I have access to all of the newspaper archives for the state of Oregon. And then, of course, globally, you can get access to things like menus from the New York Public Library. They have hundreds, if not thousands, digitized. And so I just thank goodness for the information age, that it really enables people to become scholars from their own home. And, I did have the guidance of actual, academic food science or food culture professors that helped kind of point me in the right direction if I was getting kind of stumped on something. But I think that approaching the topic as a bit of an outsider to food culture, scholarly topics, hopefully helped make the books more accessible to readers. They were supposed to be written for a general audience anyways, so even though they're being used as texts for college courses, I wanted anybody to be able to just pick up the book and learn something and maybe, be entertained along the way.
Now, breakfast as we know it, with eggs, flapjacks, and bacon, is a thing that we see in media quite a bit, in movies, TV shows, but it's not the standard like template we've always had for breakfast. And there really has maybe not been a standard template in many ways. So tell us about how breakfast has evolved over, say, the past 100 years.
Oh, well, over the past 100 years, I would say that the biggest changes have been not to what it is that we eat, but the format. So, the advent of breakfast cereal, of course, is like probably the biggest game changer.
Oh yeah.
Um, Things that, foods that are sort of more ready made or further along in the process of being, processed. So, yeah. Oh, and I'm taking breakfast through the fast food lens. That's a big change. And diners, 24-hour diners. Yeah. So over the last 100 years, all of the foods that we eat are mostly the same. In fact, diners still serve the same stuff that would have been seen on the breakfast buffet tables of wealthy Victorians. But what average working class Americans have access to is, still very close to what people ate 100 years ago. But yeah, like boxed cereals, foods that children can prepare for themselves. Those are the biggest like new developments over the past 100 years. I think that having more access to global breakfast foods has been a change too. And, I think of Mexican and Central American food as being American food too. So, breakfast tacos and breakfast burritos
Yeah.
being so common. Those I think were probably always part of the American diet, just, not as widespread as it is now. And then the breakfast sandwiches, those have been around for, a century and a half. But and even to go breakfast sandwiches have been around since Victorian days. So it's kind of interesting to see how much the more things change, the more they stay the same.
The one part of your book on breakfast that I liked was touching on how it affects pop culture. And you mentioned its relevance in Twin Peaks, in the movie
Mhm.
Breakfast Club, and then Sex and the City, which I always loved watching. I've always loved watching Sex and the City, and I just enjoyed so much their little breakfast dates they had, and I just thought it was so fun. So, do you want to talk about the breakfast effect on pop culture at all, and touch on that?
Yeah. Yeah, I think, with Sex and the City, I think they're mostly at brunch, which is a
Yeah, yeah,
decidedly sassier meal than breakfast.
yeah,
Breakfast is wholesome. Brunch is for sassy broads who were out drinking and having sex the night before and want to share their sordid tales of what they've been up to. So I think that, the breakfast table has been used really effectively. I mean, I wouldn't even say it's been effective. I'd say it's a trope. It is a trope to convey, a sense of family and normalcy. And one of my favorite uses of breakfast in pop culture and media in general has been in the series Breaking Bad, as a way to kind of show viewers that no matter how far off the deep end Walter White is getting with his like drug manufacturing, he still, made breakfast for his family, and that like kind of showed that he still had a moral compass. And the foods that, and it's the same like pancakes, bacon, and eggs. That's like the foods that dads always can cook when it's dad's turn to cook.
yeah.
And it's really used in a way to just kind of like wallpaper a scene with wholesome family values, and also to give men a chance to be in the kitchen without jeopardizing their masculinity, which is the other thing that besides barbecuing, the only meal a dad or a man is allowed to cook without being, miscast, is breakfast. It's like a heroic meal to prepare.
Yeah. Now, that was the case with my own father. He would always completely ossify the bacon every time he got a chance to cook it. Now, as an older Gen Xer, I've seen the gamut of breakfast cereal in America as it's progressed through the 60s, 70s, and 80s onward. You touched on breakfast cereal and how it's evolved in your book. What can you tell us about breakfast cereal and its kind of change over a course of time and how it's affected culture in general?
Well, breakfast cereal was the first food that was sort of marketed directly toward children. and using children to like get as a direct line to the mom's wallet. And so I think that once breakfast cereal companies, or just cereal companies in general, realized that kids were the golden ticket to that fat paycheck, that, you know, the colors, the sugar levels, the mascots all became singularly targeted toward kids. And so kids' desires began to really just direct the course of cereal. And then the kind of like back to the land, you know, post mid-century, like the 60s, late 50s, well, yeah, 60s and 70s, when there was the kind of like backlash to all the sugary, like unhealthy cereals. And then, you know, stuff like granola and grape nuts and muesli, I almost said mueslix, muesli, all of those like hippie kind of more wholesome, nutritious, whole foods type cereals. Those are kind of, I mean, they have just as much sugar and fat as the other stuff. It's just, you can identify the oats and the nuts or whatever.
Yeah.
But seeing how they kind of, cereals are always sort of have their little fingers on the pulse of what's going on culturally. And, you know, I also grew up with breakfast cereal, being a middle Gen X aged person. A lot of that same sugary cereal that you probably ate. We always had the generic version though, because my family was poor. So my mom would get like the big bags of
Yeah,
it.
yeah, we too. Yeah, we did that too.
Prizes and those big pillowcases of Cheerios. And I think that what's happening now with so much more attention on food sensitivities, or, you know, ingredients and allergies, gluten and peanuts, you know, those food allergies are much more either widespread or just being more self-diagnosed. I think that we're seeing this kind of funny crossroads of like the hippie cereals of the 60s and 70s and the kids cereals that, you know, the nostalgia is another super strong driver of marketing. So that you get this marriage of like quote unquote healthy cereal, or like cereals being made by more like wellness based food companies, but still have the sugary mascot edge that kids want. And so when I think of stuff like Barbara's Puffins, which are, you know, pretty, you know, hippie mom generic, you know, that's like this basic cereal that every hippie mom gets her kid. Well, they have the chocolate and peanut butter flavored ones, just like the ET cereal we had when we were kids.
Yeah.
And so kids today are getting like to dip their toe into their like Gen X parents' nostalgia, but are still kind of being forced to eat the healthy stuff that, you know, our grandparents probably should have been feeding to our parents.
I have seen recent articles online by people pining for the days of the cereal prize. And one thing they mentioned was, and I had forgotten about this, was the records that were on the inside of the box that you cut out.
Yeah, they were playable. Yeah, and you just like peel them off. Yeah, I've seen the ones that you peel off, and then the ones that you literally cut out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there was one, the Jackson 5 had a little record.
You were very cool if you had that.
Oh yeah, definitely. With your little Fisher Price record player that was like a little tiny suitcase. Yeah, that was.
Oh yeah.
That was the real stuff.
What is your favorite breakfast? What do you like to make?
When people ask me this question, it usually depends on the day, but I think I still prefer like soup, like a nice spicy noodle soup. I usually don't eat first thing in the morning. I've never really been a breakfast eating person. I like to be up for a few hours and let my stomach warm up on its own with coffee. It used to be back in the old days, I would just have a few cigarettes and a cup of coffee to get me through the morning. And I don't smoke anymore, of course, since I'm a parent, I'm a responsible mother. But I still just drink coffee for breakfast. And then I have my first actual meal of the day, usually like 10:30 or 11 after I've had some exercise. But yeah, I usually go for like a bowl of bean stew or spicy noodle soup or something like that, like a good kimchi stew. I just really like a big bowl of something warm and spicy.
That's nice. And I think a lot of people like that. I know that going through Chinatown in San Francisco, a lot of places offered soup in addition to like rice porridge. And that's something you could always get there as well. So I think a lot of people share that with you.
Yeah, I mean, pho is a breakfast food.
Yeah.
And, like full from Egypt, just a big bowl of fava bean stew. I think it's really common for people to eat something brothy or something really like stewy.
I've never had that for breakfast, but that sounds like that'd be really nice, actually, now that I think about it.
Yeah.
Um, and now we'll go to a word from our sponsor.
Sergeant and Mr. Smith, you're gonna love this house.
Bunk beds in a closet?
There's no field manual for finding the right home. But when you do, USAA Homeowners Insurance can help protect it the right way. Restrictions apply.
And now back to our interview. Your book on berries, I wanted to ask about how berries have changed like in the public landscape, because when I was young, if you could get strawberries, of course, and raspberries, and I think occasionally seasonally blackberries, unless they were frozen. But now I think you could find all kinds of berries in the store. Like you could actually get gooseberries at the store, which you couldn't get before. And I've seen currants in the store. And then of course we have exotic berries from all over the world now that are being touted as health benefits. So what have you seen change over time and from the studies in your book as far as our perceptions of berries and like what is acceptable as far as berries go to distribute to the public, and also what is and what isn't a berry?
That's a lot of questions. So
Sorry,
first thing, it's okay. What is technically a berry is any fruit that has many seeds inside the middle and is sort of held in place by a thin, like a skin. So the banana is technically a berry. It's a leathery type of berry. Cucumbers and melons and pumpkins are all berries. I think pretty much all nightshades, some potatoes, the potato berry, not the tuber, tomatoes, eggplants, peppers are all berries. And then of the fruits that we think of as berries, that are true berries botanically, we have currants and all of the vaccinia, so like blueberries, huckleberries, cranberries, those are all true berries. Strawberries are not a real berry. They're an aggregate fruit, I think, or no, an accessory. I can't remember. The fruits itself are the seeds on the outside, but the rest of it is just a swollen receptacle. And blackberries and raspberries are an aggregate fruit. I think they're like an aggregate of drupelets is the botanical term. So I think that people kind of know, and like the fruit growers consider any of the small fruits to be like the berries fall under small fruits, and so that's like sort of how they lump everything together.
Yeah.
I think that one of the big challenges of berries, and it's one of the reasons why most berries produced in Oregon are sold as frozen or processed as a sauce, because they are not very shippable. When they're picked to the peak of ripeness,
Yeah,
they've got a 2-day shelf life, and that's pretty much it, unless you freeze them, and then they're wonderful. And you can buy frozen Oregon grown Marionberries year round, and when you open the bag, it smells just like you were standing in a berry patch. Strawberries and blackberries and blueberries that are really commercially produced for year-round fresh markets are almost all grown in northern or like higher elevations in Mexico by Driscoll's. And Driscoll's has done a lot of work on strawberry breeding as well, but theirs are mostly for shippability, whereas in Oregon, I know Oregon State University's Extension Service is really more focused on just the flavor, because they know like it's not gonna be a fresh market product. And so the berry trials that I've been to I do professional taste testing as a fun like side gig for Oregon State University's Food Innovation Center. And yeah, one of the taste tests I did was strawberries, and all they want to know is like, what do you think about the color, the fragrance, the sweetness and the acidity? They're not asking you questions about how like long you think it was going to last. So yeah, I think that the types of berries that we have available now has definitely increased with the knowledge, or like the increasing research that shows that berries are high in antioxidants, and that those phytochemicals can be important cancer fighting agents. And so like the whole nutraceuticals thing, where food is being more prescriptive for health benefits and less just about your diet, that new research that's been emerging is driving the market for, the wellness community, especially for people to want different kinds of berries and, berries that we didn't always have access to, like goji berries, used to only be able to buy them dry at Asian grocery stores because they're, important part of traditional Chinese medicine and used in hot pots and stuff, but not a snacky thing. And acai berries too, those were not really available until like maybe the last 10 years or so. And it's all just because of new evidence shows that it's really good for you. And so that really drives the availability, the production.
Yeah, I've seen like ever since they talked about the antioxidant benefits, I've seen, there's blueberries and everything now, and like all kinds of berries I could find. Like, I don't think I ever saw in my entire life a mulberry in the store, and then I suddenly saw them dried. You could buy them by the bag. They're like $20, and it's like,
mulberries are really good. I love them. I mean, sea buckthorn is another one that's really big in Germany. Yeah, they're kind of yellow gold. They're used in juice, but yeah, in Germany they're really huge. It's like a health craze thing. But yeah, mulberries, most of the time if I get them in preserves from Russian grocery stores, I think they're produced in Armenia, but yeah, it's just such delicious preserve. It's almost like a sweeter and less crunchy fig almost. It's like the most delicious. I love it.
I lived in the Northwest up in Washington, and we used to go berry picking a lot. Now in Oregon, I know you guys have a lot of access to a lot of berries. Do you go berry picking up there in Oregon?
Well, I have friends who go to U-Pick farms all the time. I grow blackberries. When we first moved to this house, the garden space was mostly just kind of rangy rose bushes that were really thorny, and the flowers were not very scented. So it was like the worst of both worlds for a rose bush. So I ripped them all out and I put in thornless blackberries. So I have like 6 different plants of the Chester variety thornless blackberries. And they produce fruits that are, like 2 inches across. I mean, they're like,
wow,
really
that's
big blackberries. And then I grow thornless loganberries as well. So yeah, I was growing strawberries for a while, but you have to replant them every other year, and squirrels really steal a lot of them. So I just kind of gave up on those. I do enough blackberries to put up about 2 cases of jam. So yeah, I can do, like 24 pints of jam and then just freeze the rest for snacking on or baking with.
Do you have any huckleberries in your area?
Yeah, I don't have them in my yard because, again, the vaccinia prefer cooler temperatures, and my vegetable beds are on the south side of the house. It's really hot over there. But yeah, from Portland, Oregon, if you drive for like 45 minutes up to Mount Hood, you're in peak huckleberry picking patches. And those were the patches that were used historically by, Columbia River Native people for tens of thousands of years. And they would have these wonderful summer trips to escape the heat, just go up to the mountains. The women would just go up there and pack all the huckleberries into baskets and bring them down to make into big cakes for storage, like dried fruit leather cakes, not the kind with flour. So yeah, we have huckleberries here. We grow really good blueberries. All of the vaccinia like our acidic soils. Our soils are volcanic, and so it really drives what kind of plants can grow well here.
I got to pick huckleberries in California, weirdly. They don't have them here in the Bay Area, but if you go down below the Bay Area, below Santa Cruz, there's an area that's small that has them. And I remember we labored for hours picking them one at a time. And we got this like small container, which I ended up making jam with them with peaches to kind of bulk it out. And a friend of mine, I was telling her about it, and she just laughed and laughed. She goes, you boob, you have to put a sheet on the ground and shake it.
Yeah, the Native American women here used a tool that they made out of a salmon spine. So it was just the bones, sticking out like a fork basically, or like a comb, and they would just rake that, and it was attached to like a cone-shaped basket. So they would just like rake the berries right into the basket.
That's brilliant. I love
It's
that.
so much more efficient. I grow a couple of little red currant bushes in my backyard, and yeah, it's just such fiddly work picking one at a time. Yeah, so I get like my 1 pint of berries that I labored over for like a half hour. I bake one little cake, and I'm like, why do I even grow these things? I just let the rest of them rot on the bush, like let the birds have them. I don't even. It's just not worth my time. The birds like them though. It's when
Oh, yeah.
they start to ferment on the bush, the cedar waxwings like to come and get drunk off of them. It's really funny. And I like grow elderberries as well. I love elder bushes. I use the flowers as well to make syrups and things. But yes, I have about 4 or 5 elderberry bushes that put out a lot of fruit too.
Oh yeah, elderberry cordial I've heard is
Yeah, I make
the
that.
flower. Yeah.
The elderflower cordial, and then I also make elderberry cordial just with vodka and sugar to use as a cough syrup.
Nice. Now, I've seen throughout my lifetime an increase in the consumption and purchasing of spicy foods. I remember like I grew up in a household where both sides were from the South, so there's always some kind of jar of vinegar, a bottle of vinegar with peppers in it on the table, and we always had Tabasco and stuff. And then we always had like Mexican food with chilies in it and stuff like that. But I've seen stuff increase over time where now, like I said, we had the Doritos with the ghost pepper and stuff like that. These weird exotic peppers from all over the world. And in your book on chilies, you talk about how it's changed through time and culture and our concept of peppers. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. I think, since chilies are an American crop, they're a New World food. People who lived in the chili growing regions of North America and Central and South America, it was always just part of their normal diet and didn't integrate really with the white North American culture until pretty late. I think that Texans and people in the Southwest and Southeast did enjoy chilies too, but I don't think that it became as widespread where salsa, was at the usurping ketchup as the most popular condiment in America until the 60s or 70s. And one thing that I read that I thought was pretty interesting was how when soldiers and GIs were returning from the Vietnam War, they had developed a taste for spicy food, in Thailand and Vietnam, and returned to the US with that like newfound love of spicy food. And that's what started it increasing its availability besides just Mexican food, and made it more commonplace for white people, white dudes in particular, to embrace the chili. I do think that there are some components of, white supremacy to it, because I think that a lot of times white people see like liking spicy food as sort of conquering another culture in a way. Like if you can handle the spiciness, that means that you're a certain type of person instead of just a person who grew up eating spicy food or whatever.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I'm not sure. That's a topic that I would love to unpack more through more research. But I do think that, of my friends who are hot sauce makers, I have friends who are women who are hot sauce makers, and they don't feel very welcome at some of the hot sauce expos and those like really eating competitions and stuff, because it's mostly just broy white guys.
Oh my God.
Trying to one up each other with how much spice they can handle. And, meanwhile, I've got these friends who are like making beautiful artisanal salsas that are nuanced and flavorful. And yeah, they have a kick, they're spicy, but it's not all about beating you over the head with Scovilles.
Yeah.
And I hope that people will catch up to the art of chili instead of just the weaponizing of it.
Well, yeah, I mean, because chilies are so delicious, I don't think you should have it be a punishment or an endurance test. I mean, it's food.
Right. Well, and I think that people do the thrill-seeking part of it. It's like going on a roller coaster ride where you're probably not going to actually die. I mean, it does happen occasionally, but you get to feel unsafe and in danger, but you know you're actually not going to like get hurt. And that's what's so nice about chili, and just eating capsaicin, is that it feels like an injury to your body, and your brain processes it as an injury, but it actually doesn't damage you. And so your nerves aren't being hurt. It's just your brain's being tricked into thinking that you're being injured. So you get kind of a little kick out of that. And the endorphins are real. I mean, that response that your brain has to the perceived threat is still real, and it's exhilarating. And so, of course, even if, I mean, I'm not like a macho chili head, but I do like to have some hot sauce at the table. It just lives there. And I always sauce my plate separately. My kids he likes some spicy food. He's learning to like spicy food, but he doesn't like it as spicy as I do. So I think that it's just like anything else. I mean, like super duper hoppy beer, I think people start getting in this competitive mindset of like how much you can handle, how strong you can make something before people tap out. And I don't know what there is to that mentality, but
can't remember the hottest thing I've ever ate, but I've never totally, I mean, I don't want to like punish myself with something so hot that I can't stand it. But I remember I was in England and I was going to a Chinese takeaway, and I got it was like a squid with like a black bean sauce and peppers. And it was so hot that I think it killed the cold that I had at the time.
Yeah, no, serious. I always, whenever I feel the first tickle in the back of my throat, I always eat something super spicy with lots of garlic and ginger too, usually. Like, so I love just eating a big bowl of kimchi stew or some like noodle soup with a bunch of chili crisp, just like the oil slick of red chili oil floating on top. It's effective.
Oh yeah. Now, do you grow chilies yourself?
I do. I don't grow as many as I would like. They don't do as well here. I mean, I could probably just take better care of them. I don't know. I'm not an expert at growing chilies. I'm not that experienced, but I do grow a couple of different Korean chilies. And this year I'm growing some purple heirloomy fancy ones.
Ooh.
But yeah, I usually just grow a couple of like shishito, or like the little kind of, I forgot the Korean word for the same type of pepper. So it's a couple of mild Korean chilies, and then I grow a few spicy Korean chilies. And this year I'm growing some aji limon. Last year I grew the Sichuan Facing Heaven chilies that, when you get a bag of dried chilies from the supermarket, or my friends were traveling to Chengdu and brought me back a bag of dried chilies, I just shook the seeds out of the pods and just planted them. And I had like lots of little chili plants from that.
That's neat. I like that. And I want to mention too that your chili cookbook has some really nice recipes at the end of it. I recommend heartily. I haven't made the Kung Pao recipe yet, but I really want to, because my wife likes Kung Pao chicken, so I want to make that very soon. How did you come to food writing? Where did it start for you, where you decided to start doing it?
Well, I have always enjoyed writing as a hobby. And it's funny, when I look back on my life, a lot of times I was like, why am I doing this? Like, I have no business being a writer. I always wanted to be a scientist when I grew up, and it's what I studied in school, got my degree in biology and worked as a field scientist for 10 years. But I was doing the blog just for fun, as like a hobby basically. But then after I had my son in 2009, I'd just been a field scientist, and I couldn't take my baby with me to whatever, the middle of nowhere, small town hotel room where I'm working out of for that month or whatever, that week. I was just doing so much field work, and it was gone for so long that I tried to redirect that part of my career into more project management and permitting and more office-based stuff. But there just was so much resistance from my supervisors. There was only 2 other moms in that whole office, and they wanted to keep their jobs too. And so since I was, my strengths were in the field, I was like, my career's over then. This is not, there are no moms who are field scientists. It doesn't, unless your partner is also a field scientist and you guys can just live on the road. Like, it's not. So I took my love of writing and blogging I had actually gotten an invitation from Ken Abala, who was my editor for Portland and The Breakfast Book. He was doing editing of Food Cultures of the World encyclopedia, I think 5 volumes, and he asked if I would like to write the Pacific Northwest chapter. He was just somebody who read my blog and liked it. And so, yeah, I wrote that encyclopedia chapter. And then, yeah, like a year, I turned in that assignment the day before I gave birth. So it was like
Wow.
just folding into like the seamless transition of power from one career to the next. So yeah, then he announced on Facebook, I think a year or so later, that he was going to be editing a series called The Meals. And so I wrote a proposal and pitched to do breakfast with a sample chapter and everything. And I was awarded the contract, which is great. But it wasn't like I came up with this brilliant idea to write a breakfast book. It was just part of a series. I auditioned for the job and I got it. And that was that. And then similar story with the Portland book. They wanted to do a big city food biography series, and I had to kind of fight to get Portland seen as an important enough food city to be included in the series. And I still don't know that it's been the lowest performing of my books. It's a very niche topic. But yeah, so it's funny because I often feel like, wow, I just kind of lucked into this new career. But the first piece of food writing I ever did was when I was in 4th grade, and I wrote a poem about an orange. And the first time I ever was paid to write nonfiction was when I was in 6th grade, and I submitted an essay to Archie Comics on gerbils, and I got first place.
That's
so
awesome.
I've always kind of been doing this. I just didn't put 2 and 2 together until much later in life that, well, I could actually be a writer full time, and that's a real job that I can have. It's okay to be good at more than one thing, or to just take one completely out of left field thing and turn it into something else that's completely out of left field. So like, yeah, from field biologist to culinary historian, I mean, weirder transitions have been made, I'm sure.
I'm surprised that you're saying that your Portland book didn't do better, because I read it and I thought it was excellent. And not only because, I mean, I don't know Portland very well, but now I feel like I do, because, you talk a lot about the history and people that have, the chefs that have made it, from there, and just, there was a lot of good insider info. Now I'm somebody who, I live in the Bay Area, but I'm not from here. And I like to read stuff about the Bay Area because it kind of makes me feel like I'm plugged into it and part of it. So you say that it didn't
it didn't sell that many copies is what
Yeah.
I mean. I mean, it was well received, and it's been pretty well reviewed. It's just that, Portland's not a huge place. I wouldn't say that, everybody who bought it is from Portland or lives in Portland, but yeah, it's mostly been embraced by people who are interested in learning more about the first foods of the area, like the way people ate pre-European settlement, because I did do a lot of research on not just the work of ethnographers who were interested in what weapons and tools people were using, but the early botanists of the area were really interested in what kind of plants women were using. And so like those types of things, and like my background with natural history and that kind of research felt like a really like comfortable place for me to kind of spread out my roots a little bit as a writer. But so yeah, I mean, I'm glad. And, it's also sad to see, just since that book was published, how much has changed, which restaurants have already closed down,
yeah, the last year's been awful.
The pandemic too. I mean, we had quite a few just closures that would just happen randomly. A lot of development happening out here, and a lot of speeding towards the future, and not enough respect for the past.
Your history portions of the book are really solid. Has it made you want to write anything else on history or any kind of other? Do you have any other historical books coming out in the future? Because I think you do a really good job with it. You seem to have a real knack for it. I almost would be, I mean, if you told me you have a master's or a doctorate in history, I'd be very convinced, because you write that well.
Thank you. I'm not presently working on any books. I do have a couple of ideas for things I would like to spend some real time on, rabbit holing on. But they're just mostly very niche-y things. So like, I mean, I kind of want to do like a real culinary history of Germans from Russia and like really trace the roots, like just attempt to scratch the surface of why Americans mostly who are of that descent, like we only have a few foods that we kind of stick to. So anyways, I have like some ideas for things that I would like to write. I don't know if I ever want to do any cookbooks though, because they're grueling to produce and rarely make any money. So we'll see. And I've been having so much fun with writing articles and doing magazine work, because then I can just geek out on one thing for 1,000 words and then move on to the next thing. And like my ADHD brain can really like hyper focus on one thing at a time and then, flit on to the next thing. And it's really satisfying for me to like become a micro expert in a bunch of different things.
So I want to ask you the last question that I like to ask people, and it's the fun question. Although I hope all the questions are fun. If you could create a dinner for up to 10 people, living or dead, famous or not, who would you invite and what would you cook or order in?
Oh my gosh, 10 people. That's a big dinner party.
Yeah, I mean, it could be less. Just I like to kind of create a ballpark just so I'm not limiting it too much.
Okay. Oh, it would have to be, I would love to eat with Anthony Bourdain. I never had a chance to have a meal with him or break bread with him. MFK Fisher, of course. Grande dame of food writing. Lillian Tingle, who is another great woman of food writing who I've mentioned and just fawn over in my Portland book. She was the woman who introduced the domestic science program to Portland Public Schools. She was the Oregonians' cooking columnist for many years and led the charge in developing hygiene protocols for American grocery stores by, inspiring American housewives to like step up to the plate and take it into their own hands. So she's a personal hero of mine. I also love Lucy Rose Mallory, she was the daughter of Rufus Mallory, who Rufus Mallory was her husband. Aaron Rose was her father, who established Roseburg, Oregon. But she was I think she had a type of epilepsy that wasn't diagnosed back then. But she was like a psychic and a spiritualist and would have seances in the parlor of the hotel that her husband owned. He was a congressman too. So, and she was a vegetarian, lifelong vegetarian. She was her mother was a Kellogg. So I would just love to like see what she's into. Probably like Protos nuggets and some other weird like vegetarian substitutes. So that's 5 people. I would love to have Jimi Hendrix over. I've always had a huge crush on him. Let's see if I can think of any living people who might be listening, who might actually like take me up on this dream meal. Who would I want to hang out? I can't think of any other. Oh, Fiona Apple. If you're out there, if you're listening, girl, holler at me. I will make you anything you want. I would probably, I'd have to make something separate for my vegetarian guests, but I would just cook them a whole pig. No, that's not cool. I would make a pot of humble bean stew and biscuits or cornbread, and with homemade hot sauce. My nice like smoky beanie, sauce and the beans, because I think that a humble pot of bean stew is a real testament to a person's ability to cook. If you can make, peasant food taste really good, then you've got the chops.
I agree.
Yeah. And I would probably make some like salads too, and some kind of fruit galette for dessert, or like a little pound cake with berry compote or something.
That's lovely. Whenever I ask people this question, a lot of times people go right towards heavy stuff. I don't know if that makes for a good event or a good evening, because then it's like everybody's kind of like stuffed. Nobody wants to talk. They just want to sleep.
I think as long as everyone leaves 2 hours after eating a big bowl of beans, then I think everyone will be fine. But yeah, no one wants to be
That's a good point.
Super gassy dinner party.
We'll be passing around Beano for everybody. Please partake.
Yeah, that would be a very awkward situation. Yeah.
Well, Heather, it's been wonderful talking to you. Thank you for being on the podcast.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for reaching out. It's really nice talking to you too, Dean.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Heather Arndt Anderson. If you haven't read her books yet, I really urge you to. Her book, Breakfast, is wonderful. Her book on chilies, A Global History, is wonderful, as well as her book, Berries, A Global History. And even if you don't live in Portland or Oregon, her book, Portland, A Food Biography, is wonderful. If you're a biology nerd or a history nerd like I am, or even a mythology nerd because she has stuff in there about that as well, those are all things that you're going to want to check on. Wonderful books and available on Amazon.com. So I want to thank you for being here for the Well-Seasoned Librarian, and I bid you a wonderful day. Keep cooking.